They say that passing this policy will put me in a mental state where I will feel terrorized to speak about who I am as a Hindu, fearing that people will stereotype me or target me simply due to my last name, my family name, or my Hindu background. I will feel uncomfortable wearing cultural outfits, conducting religious rituals, catering vegetarian food, or even simply holding a discussion on our religious practices and philosophy due to fear of being labeled as a caste oppression.
A very good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Namaste and welcome to Citti Media. I'm joined by Nikunj Trivedi ji, president of CoNHA. Namaste, Nikunj ji. The last time we spoke, we were speaking about dismantling global Hindutva, and there seems to be a rally of these events happening in the United States. While there is an actual war going on between Russia and Ukraine, India continues to face a civilizational battle, would you say?
I agree with you. We'll talk about that as we go in. Yes.
Now, one of the popular events that is being organized is to save pluralism in India, and one of the former vice presidents is also being a part of it. So what impact does this have about how people in the United States perceive India?
That's an interesting question. And first of all, thank you for having me today. I want people to understand a few things, right? One is this idea of, India is in danger, like the pluralism in India is in danger, minorities in India are dangers. This kind of narrative has been spun for the past at least 20 plus years that I know about, right? Whether you talk about, you can go back to the genesis of the Gujarat riots, or even before that, the Ram Janmabhoomi. Many of these types of incidents have been spun out in and exaggerated in such a way to show that India, I call that Indophobia, that India is a country, as a nation state, is very intolerant and is suppressing its minorities and things like that. Meanwhile, if you look at the ground reality, are there problems in India? Yes, there are definitely problems in India, just like problems here, right? There are people who get shot, kids get shot every, like 3 or so kids get shot every hour in America, okay? So many women are raped every hour in America, but you don't see groups of people from in America going to another country like India or somewhere else in China and having these human rights violations, panels and things like that to air out some kind of a laundry. So you have certain agents that are behind it. And in reality, the ground reality is a lot of Americans actually, think India is a great place. The community here, the Indian American community, the Hindu community has done a great job, contributing to the fabric of the United States, and US and India are coming closer and closer in terms of partnerships, allyships, and things like that. Yeah. Naturally, there's also an undercurrent of some people who feel that, oh, India is a rape nation, India is this country and that country. And that narrative, we have to keep challenging through education and through counter events and things like that. But these are the same players. If you look at the list of the players, they have been the same players who have been crying from their rooftops, saying India is suppressing minorities, this, that, whether it comes to CAA, whether it comes to Kashmir, whether it comes to farmers' protests, it's always the same group.
If that's the case, Nikunji, is there a certain pattern in terms of who's funding it and what's the vested interest?
Yes, there is. And there are groups out there that have done a lot of research. I've seen a few websites. There's a website. Well, let me start with the first book that I'm well aware of. It's called Breaking India. So if you ever read, noted author Rajiv Malhotraji has written a book called Breaking India. In that, he talks about the fault lines that are being exploited, whether it's the Dalits, sort of Dalit Dravidian fault lines, or the whole idea of India as a nation state and democracy, using Aryan invasion theories or using outdated theories about India as a country, Hinduism as a religion, etc. And he talks about the players within that, right? So there's a nexus of academics, right? Whether it's US-based Western academics or Western academics in general, or their Indian counterparts who lend a hand to each other. And we see this in the Dismantling Global Hindutva Conference or many other places. Then you have a series of groups that are associated with certain types of Christian, sort of missionary organizations that are really trying to exploit the fault lines, right? They're trying to convert Hindus You saw the Lavanya case very recently also, and they try to destabilize certain places within India. You see the Northeast belt has a huge amount of these types of folks who are always going there and converting, and you have active people from here, not just today, but 200 years ago also, 300 years ago also, trying to come and say, you guys are heathens and you guys have false gods. You need to convert to save yourself. And that narrative has changed in many different ways. And the third piece has been sort of like these corporations or large mega organizations who are going into India, who are actually in the name of, I would say, social justice, in the name of development work, actually trying to destabilize an entire country. And that is unfortunate too, because some of these are very well-known names out there. And so Rajiv Malhotra has done a great job talking about some of these types of nexuses who sometimes work in tandem. They work with each other, they sponsor each other, they support each other's research papers, they tweet each other, right? So there's an entire ecosystem that they have built to essentially spread Indophobia, and then from that Hinduphobia, I would say. So for me, Indophobia is the tip of the iceberg, like the top part, but the underlying thing is Hinduphobia, because ultimately they want to show that how Hinduism or Hindu civilization there's something wrong with it, and that needs to be radically transformed or dismantled.
And in fact, one of the organizations that is funding this upcoming event is also linked with Jamaat-e-Islami, allegedly. So that just goes to directly prove what are the underlying intentions. Now, I'd like to redirect your attention towards what's happening in America again, in terms of how caste is being played out in universities as a narrative. And COHNA and I think a few other groups have been writing to different universities about this. First of all, when I did read a lot of the articles to understand better what's happening exactly, one of the easiest ways in which the psychology was used by mainstream media was to portray a lot of your organizations as somebody who's opposing anti-caste discrimination policies, right? So is that the case? Are you a casteist, Nikunj?
Thank you very much for asking that question. And the short answer is no. Obviously, no, none of us is casteist, but that's the idea. This is what they say. Like if you're opposing this, that means you love discrimination. Okay, this is what they're trying to say. But I have some news for everybody that COHNA is not a casteist organization. If that's news flash for the ones who actually think, because we have people from all different castes. In fact, our leadership has people from the so-called Dalit groups, the so-called Bahujan communities, things like that. So to accuse us of being casteist is basically showing their agenda. And I'll come to that. So first, I want to say that our leadership, including our some of the key volunteers, come from all backgrounds. Okay. So, and we have made it very clear, then that's how it's going to be. We promote them. They in fact, someone who identifies himself as Dalit actually performs pujas and opening mantras and things like that in our meetings.
Right.
Okay. So this is this is sort of what Hindu community is like in America. This is what we are about. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there for those who think that we are casteist and we're trying to pose this policy because we are casteist. That's completely, nonsense.
Excellent.
That's the first thing. The second thing.
Having established that, before we delve into this further, could we please touch upon what exactly the issue is and why this policy is problematic, and then we'll further comment on it.
That's correct. So let me sort of rewind a little bit. This whole thing started back in February of 2021, where the student government or student assembly of Cal State University passed a resolution asking for caste to be included in the anti-discrimination policy. But if you look at the resolution, and I have a copy of it, let me just kind of talk about this a little bit, because it's very important that people understand how this whole thing came about. People think that this is just out of nowhere. So this resolution essentially badmouths Hinduism. Okay, it talks about the fact that this 1 billion people are under the whole are apparently affected by caste. Okay, number one. Number two is they say that caste is spiritually sanctioned, and in quote they say spiritually sanctioned, and then of course they talk about caste being Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishyas, and Shudras. So you can see this pattern that basically says that it's actually Hindu in origin. It's Hinduism, blaming Hinduism. Then they come to the idea that 25% or something of Dalits experienced caste-based violence in America based on one survey by a group that is openly anti-Hindu. Okay, and we have said this again and again. you cannot rely on one survey. Where is the damn data? There is no data besides that one survey to show that there is widespread discrimination, caste discrimination in America. So using one survey again and again, and that again, if you look at the resolution, it keeps mentioning the same survey. Then it talks about, it brings in like the whole idea that casteism is the same thing as racism and so on. So there's all this other, American mainstream problems that are spun into this resolution. Okay, so that was the genesis of this resolution. And then it talks about, it goes into the whole Cisco case, and most people don't realize about Cisco. And we talked about this before too. There's a lot of issues. The Cisco case, first of all, is sub judice, so there's no ruling yet. Still, there are a lot of different facts that have been treated as allegations that have been treated as facts, right? So again, I don't need to go into that, but they use that Cisco case, and then they use the BAPS case of this entire movement and say, okay, I experience casteism here. Well, why don't you talk about casteism in America? We're not talking, this is like, we're not passing a policy on India. India already has policies on caste, whatever it is, but this is not, you cannot superimpose that here. So our issue is, number one, show us the damn data. The universities have not done their due diligence. They have not listened to the people against who this policy will be. So if you're going to have an impact, the Hindu American community or the Indian American community has the right to say, okay, show us the data. Let's talk about this. Hear our perspective. None of that has happened. The second thing is they are relying on only one survey again and again and again. In fact, in UC Davis, the head of the anti-discrimination or that area had a presentation by Equality Labs and then decided that, oh, this is a problem. Well, what about, we have tried to reach out to them saying, let us give you our presentation. Let us talk about this. That's the second issue. So reliance on factually inaccurate data that has been unproven by, that have been disproven by Carnegie Endowment, relying on one piece of survey, not looking at the full due diligence, no academic integrity. Then on top of that, they're not assessing, they're not taking into account the voices of students and faculty of Hindu and Indian origin, right, to say what is the problem here. And then finally, how are they planning to monitor this? What is caste? Caste is not a defined category, even in India, okay? And then they have a category in the UC Davis case called perceived caste. So now there's a thing called caste, which is not really well defined. And then there's a thing called perceived caste. So essentially anybody can say that I was discriminated based on my perceived caste. The other person has no idea what you're talking about, okay? Yeah. Then how do you determine like I said, the caste, right? So do you have a roster? Are you keeping a roster of thousands of castes? There's not 4 castes. There's no Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Sudra. That's not a caste. Yeah. Okay. Then on top of that, how will they determine? So let's say, for example, a faculty member, gives a student a bad grade. Okay. The student turns around and sues that, or basically complains against that faculty. And the faculty member is accused of being casteist. Yeah. Whether the allegation is true or not, media will take this and make it a big deal and say, look, this professor was accused. So there is caste discrimination. So people can be very well targeted. And if you see, final point, we had shared a letter from students, okay, on our Twitter feed. And if you look at the type of language you see from the kids, right, they are scared of the fact of the impact of this thing on their religious freedom and civil rights. Right. So let me just quickly read a quick excerpt from there. Okay. They say that passing this policy will put me in a mental state where I will feel terrorized to speak about who I am as a Hindu, fearing that people will stereotype me or target me simply due to my last name, my family name, or my Hindu background. I will feel uncomfortable wearing cultural outfits, conducting religious rituals, catering vegetarian food, or even simply holding a discussion on our religious practices and philosophy due to fear of being labeled as a caste oppression. Now, we have seen this in different types of festivals that have been denounced by Holi against Hindutva, right? So Holi was denounced as casteist. Navratri is denounced as casteist. Diwali in November was denounced as casteist. I mean, which festival of Hindus is not casteist then, right? That means all Hindus are casteist. Even Hindus are born and raised in America who have no connection to, social dynamics in India. Just because they have a last name, they're casteist. This is the danger. This is what we are against.
This is one of the ways in which data is being manipulated in India as well. And I think they're taking a cue out of what is happening here. Because if you look at the NCRB data, I mean, of course, there are incidents where such discriminations do take place. I mean, let's not live in that alternative reality. But the problem is they never mention who's the actual perpetrator, because the perpetrator in many of the cases in India are not Hindus, right? So, and that fact is never really brought out. So in that sense, even if this were to be implemented and sort of enforced, how do you actually quantify and qualify something as a caste-based discrimination?
That's exactly my problem. See, I want to be very categorically clear. Two things. One is there is caste-based discrimination in parts of India. Okay, there's not. We're not talking about denying that altogether. Okay, but that has nothing to do with what goes on in America. Okay, they're two different separate issues. Okay, some of them may have some interconnectedness from a social dynamics perspective. Are there people who might, be casteist in mindset? Yes, but I'm talking about data, right? We need to have the data to show that this is a problem in America. Indian dynamics cannot be superimposed to America. Okay, that's like being very, biased and prejudiced against the Hindu community and Indian community in America. Right. But coming back to your point, how do you quantify? That's what we're trying to say. The only quantification or the whole idea right now is one survey. Okay, one survey that has been continuously discredited. One case in Cisco that has also been challenged. Okay, for example, if you look at, there was a recent change.org petition that laid out the problems in the survey. So for example, John Doe claimed that he was not chosen for a head engineering position. He never applied for that position. Okay, and then the guy who was charged, the so-called Brahmin manager, Mr. Iyer, who Mr. John Doe claims that he was discriminated against him, offered all the top 3 positions, head positions, okay, right, to the first group of Dalit candidates. Same thing, like it goes on, right? Then Doe claims that there was salary-based discrimination and he did not receive the salary increment worth only a few $1,000s. But the person who was accused, Mr. Iyer, gave away 100% of his equity, which is like several millions of dollars, to all of his employees, including John Doe. Okay, so now he has millions of dollars. So how is this person Dalit? So if you look at the nitty-gritty of things, right, the data can be very, very easily challenged. Yeah. And but the problem is it's propaganda. Once you start to do a lot of propaganda, you're only using one survey. The UC Davis resolution by the students referred to one survey 19 times. Okay. Right. And they asked the CSU survey asked the university to take recommendations for inequality labs. So now you know who's going to be giving the data and who's going to be judging on this. One organization who has anti-Hindu bias. Right. And
frankly, how are students reacting to this? Because there are a lot of social justice warriors even on our side, and those who genuinely speak about that, let's keep them aside, regardless of political or any other differences that may be.
Yeah, we don't have it. See, you can have your own political differences. You may agree or disagree with the Indian government, whatever your stances are. But if you're an intelligent human being, you will say, okay, first of all, why are we using a faulty survey? And why are we not using other surveys? Okay, the universities have vast resources, so they should be conducting independent surveys to figure out this is what they do. They're academic institutions. They should be saying that, okay, before we pass a survey, before we pass a policy, we're going to go ahead and do a survey to figure out what the problem within our universities. Forget about other universities. What is the problem within the 23 or plus off-campus centers of Cal State? Is there a widespread problem? Okay, do the survey, let's see finding, and then discuss the findings with the stakeholders. Okay, that has not been done. Then you have groups that are really targeting the Hindu community for a long time. So the people need to see that if you're going to go and talk to someone who has an open anti-Hindu bias and use their survey is just flawed. It's going to be biased, no doubt. And then on top of that, people need to understand that there are a lot of colonial biases when it comes to the conversation on caste. And there are research papers, books written by non-Hindus, okay? Like I mentioned, if you go to our website, CoNHA.org/decolonize, we have a vast number of resources. These are well-reputed scholars, not the Hindutva people that these people like talk about, or any sometimes not even Hindus, right? Nicholas Dirks, Ronald Inden, Susan Bailey. I mean, I can go on and on. The list is long, right? The reason I'm bringing up these names is because none of them are Hindus. They're independent scholars who have shown how today's caste system, as we know, is a result of colonial social re-engineering. That doesn't mean that discrimination, social discrimination did not exist, but that exists in society in general. Not just, this is not a Hindu thing. It was in Egypt, it was in the Middle East, it was in Europe, so many places, right? South America, if you look at that. So what I'm trying to say is our social justice warriors need to understand that when you're trying to address a problem, you also need to understand where the problem came from, not blame an entire religion. Because I can tell you in America, if you decided to blame other religions based on selected verses from their texts, right, you will be branded an Islamophobe or an anti-Semite, rightfully so, because you can't dismantle an entire religion based on selected quotes or outdated colonial racist theories.
In fact, something like homophobia, for that matter, does exist even in India and the United States. But I'm talking in the context of how Hindus perceive, sexual fluidity and etc.
Correct.
Now, there's a lot of diversity, and our ancient scriptures have had proofs of that. But the problem is we do have inherited Victorian values, for that matter. So I agree with you. But in a sense of speaking, what is the way forward, and how is your organization planning to fight this? Because essentially you're going into battle knowing that you'll be branded as casteist. So it's a PR nightmare for beginners.
No, look, that's how if you want to defeat your enemy, you kind of first of all brand them, right? You label them a certain way, and then you continue to repeat. It's a very, in the communist world or in the Nazi propaganda, this was used again and again, and successfully so, right? So this is the same strategy that these people are using to brand us, so we don't even get a chance to speak, right? But we have our own ways of doing it. I'm not going to share all the details, but we are going to be fighting back because this is a question of our existence and identity in America, continuously being, first of all, if you go from 6th grade onwards, they teach you that Hinduism is nothing but caste. Okay, they keep teaching you that. One girl remarked that there are 33 mentions of caste in a 7 to 8 page or 10 page overview about Hinduism in India. Okay, so what did someone learn from all the way from 6th grade? That Hinduism is nothing but caste. Then you come to high school, then you come to college, where you're taught the same thing, never taught any alternative ideas or viewpoints, even though today's social justice movements are all about decolonizing, right? Or using decolonial lens to talk about this. So you can start to see. So what we're doing is we're doing education. So we have our caste workshops. So we have a 2-hour workshop that we invite everybody to come, and we go through, we don't deny caste-based discrimination. We never denied that. We still don't deny it today. But what we're saying is that you need to look at the whole picture. The picture is a lot more complex, and you have to look at the historical reasons why we exist, why this problem is there too, right? All those things we talk about, education. And then we're reaching out to our, whether it's the universities or political candidates, etc., or political leaders, to say, hey, we need your help, because the Hindu community and the Indian American community has been contributing very positively to establish themselves here, as well as contribute positively to the social and economic fabric of this country. And now we are being discriminated against. Our civil rights are being violated. Our religious freedoms is being stampled upon. So we are going, we're going to be fighting back in this situation. And we're working with all organizations. By the way, as I mentioned before, we also have Dalit organizations and Bahujan organizations working with us. So it's not about, because they also feel that we need to live, we can't escape what happened to some of our ancestors, but we need to move past that. We need to beyond, because Hinduism, Hindu Dharma offers the toolkit to end such discrimination. Because if you really absorb all the great values of Hindu Dharma, from the Vedas to the Gitas and the Upanishads, etc., you can come to a very high level of being, and from a social justice perspective and from a spiritual perspective. So we are working even with Dalit organizations, Bahujan organizations, etc., and they feel part of the whole Hindu community, and they want to get rid of all of this sort of like labeling and barriering, because you're essentially producing what's going on in India over here, right? That's the idea. And people want to say, let's move beyond this. Don't deny it. Don't sort of dismiss it wholesale. But let's also make sure that people understand that this is not a problem in America.
Right. I mean, knowing the pattern very well by now, I think even the Dalit organizations who are your allies will be probably passed off as the creamy layer and the privileged ones among the lot. So,
and I'll tell you a story. We have in COHNA for the past, I would say, year. We have been around almost 2 years now, right? But for the past, for the first year until this caste issue happened, let's say July, August, or something like that, first 6 months, 7 months, none of us ever talked about our caste or anything related to caste or anything like that. Okay. All of a sudden, people in our groups, came to me and said, I have to tell you something. And I'm like, what? It's like, I never discussed this whole caste nonsense and stuff until today. Because they're like, now I'm developing this whole anxiety that all of a sudden I'm going to be labeled as a low caste or high caste just because of this narrative. And I said, well, you should speak up because you are being considered low caste when you don't have that mindset of yours, right? All of a sudden, somebody's going to be saying that your kid is low caste because of some pyramid out there. Okay. Mm-hmm. So these people who are, very strong volunteers and leadership team members of ours basically said, enough is enough. We're going to fight this because we don't consider ourselves. Why should we identify as low caste when we, this is all a colonial idea and we are here in America. I am working. I am a young professional. I am this and I'm that. Why am I considered Shudra all of a sudden? Or why am I considered Dalit all of a sudden when none of this thing really, I want to leave all this behind. I want to focus on the core aspects of Hindu Dharma that uplift me, that make me better as an individual. Yeah. Okay. So our volunteers stood up and they are the ones fighting. So if you're going to think that when Dalits and, Bahujans are fighting against this, now you're going to consider them casteist, or are you going to consider them agents of castes or Brahmins? Somehow they were part of this conspiracy being run by Brahmins and things like that. That's what's happening because the true change is not being embraced. These folks want to continue to light the fire of divisions within the community and make sure that the social dynamics or political dynamics of India are superimposed over here and spread Hinduphobia.
Very good luck with your resistance, and please do keep us updated about what happens. Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure speaking to you.
Yes, namaste. Thank you for having me.
Namaste, Nikunj.
Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.